Welcome, everybody. When it comes to situations of migrating environments or deploying environments in the cloud, often we run into customers that are really struggling with a certain aspect or different pieces of it. And a lot of this revolves around, as they've moved some of those simpler, easier items, now looking at some of the more complex workloads, such as your Oracle environments or your SAP environments, those enterprise application environments, making those move to the cloud. In this session, I'm going to talk about how to build a reliable, high-performance landscape for your SAP on Azure migration. My name is Jeff Whitaker, and I'm on the Public Cloud Services team at NetApp, where I work specifically with Microsoft Azure. And one of the things I want to highlight before we even get going here is I got a QR code right from the start that if you want to learn a little bit more about what I'm going to talk about, you want to go off and take a look at some of our details, follow this QR code. It'll take you to our landing page in the MS Ignite environment, and you can find out more and you can actually win some prizes. And I'll touch on that one in the end as well. So when we're talking about the enterprise app environment and that evolution into the cloud, what we're talking about is Oracle, SQL, SAP landscapes, and those different types of applications that are on the move into the cloud itself. But we've run into a number of things, and customers have been dealing with some of these concerns around performance. What used to be really high performance, it either takes a new architecture or a new design to get the performance out of the cloud environment itself. And sometimes that's just not something that you can do or do simply. And then being able to make sure that that environment is highly available, because when you're talking about core workloads, you want to make sure that you have the availability to run those in that risk avoidance scenario when you run those in the cloud. So some of the challenges that we see from our customers are really around those enterprise capabilities in the cloud. More specifically, those file service environments where applications have files, where applications have storage requirements that are file-based, making that move into there and getting out of it the performance that they have come to expect in the data center, and then the reliability as well. So when we're talking about those data environments, making sure that they're highly reliable for these types of applications. And then built-in enterprise management capabilities, being able to make sure that your data is protected and different tools are available to you as you make that move. And one of the big pieces that we've seen from our customers making this move in, or moving big applications into Azure itself, or moving into the cloud as a whole, is storage has often become the bottleneck. Where they're looking for different ways of, maybe it's a compute problem, maybe it's a network problem, but the Azure offers a ton of options in that environment. But storage tends to be the bottleneck. And now just to kind of tie that specifically into an SAP scenario, when you're looking at all those different paths to moving into Azure, file is a key component of it. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, no matter which path you take, files are required. The file service environment is required in SAP. Whether you're going from R3 and you're just doing a lift and shift into Azure, or you're making that full scale migration from an R3 environment into an S4 HANA environment in the cloud. So that's where we come in. As you see here, I'm with NetApp, but we're talking about a service where NetApp and Microsoft have worked together to build what's called Azure NetApp Files. This is a first-party Microsoft service. I'm NetApp. We help provide the technology. We help build the solution so that Microsoft can offer an enterprise-capable file share environment in the cloud. And from this, we offer a whole host of protocols, from legacy stuff in the Linux environment to the current stuff, as well as the Windows environments as well. In an SAP architecture, Windows file services are not really required. But think about if you want to look at log files, or you want to do something in the environment from a Windows host, you have access to it with a Windows file share environment as well. So different things that we do there to make it easier for you. It gives you the performance that you've come to expect in the data center, from a latency perspective, from a throughput perspective, and an availability perspective, running NetApp technology inside of Azure. And then we offer it in multiple tiers. So you can actually get the price performance match to meet what your application is requiring. And a key piece of what this performance really means is it is certified for use with SAP HANA. This means that production certification. This is not just a dev environment. This is not just a test environment. This is production. It is certified for use with SAP. So make sure that you understand when you're looking at these different architectures, you're looking at the capabilities available to you as you're making these migrations, understand what some of these different pieces mean to you. And then we bring along with it our advanced data management capabilities from snapshot technologies, cloning, replication tools, things that are all built in at the storage layer, and especially around the snapshot technology, which NetApp invented almost 20 years, or almost 30 years ago, actually. This is something that's become commonplace in the storage. A lot of people, pretty much everybody's doing some form of a snapshot. But the way that we do it actually is perfect for the cloud. We don't take space, we don't take time in order to do the snapshots. And when you're talking about the cloud, you pay for every bit and byte. So anytime you take a snapshot and you don't have to pay for the additional cost of storage, it's a big one. And then also, because this is a Microsoft service, you get an Azure consistent experience from how you use it, because it's deployed right out of the portal, to also being supported directly by Microsoft as well. We come in, we help sell with Microsoft, we help support with Microsoft, but effectively this is a Microsoft service. And to touch a little more on that, just as some of the core components of the service, reducing risk is a big one. Achieving 99.99% availability out of the box. The service is certified or is guaranteed by Microsoft as well. And then we have the built-in data protection capabilities to go along with that. Cost is a big one. If you can take the performance up to a high level and actually remove a bottleneck in the actual application architecture, it's a big one, because you can start saving money on maybe some of the other components alone, because we've got customers that are over provisioning compute to try to squeeze out as much performance as they can because the storage just wasn't fast enough to keep up. Remove that bottleneck, and now you can start bringing those costs down. So we've seen up to 60% reductions in compute costs by people taking advantage of Azure NetApp Files. And then time. It's very easy to deploy. It's right out of the Azure portal. Very simple tools. It's not like you don't have to have a PhD in storage in order to deploy this. So very big one there. And then again, saving time around the snapshots. I'm going to touch on this one a little bit more as we move forward. So getting into the SAP specifics. On the left here are just some of the highlights. I've touched a little bit on these already. Simplified storage management, giving you a native experience with all the tools that you need to make your storage environment under control. And highly performant, again, touched on this one. We see volume performance up to 4.5 gigs of throughput out of a single storage volume. So very, very high throughput capabilities. So if you've got all kinds of information flowing into your database environment, you can resolve this with up to our ultra tier, our fastest tier for a throughput perspective. But again, having that ultra low latency as well to get what you would expect from the data center standpoint. And then being able to scale that on demand. The performance is a function of the size of the volumes. So you can dial up and dial down the capacity to really deliver a performance characteristic that fits your need. Enterprise data management, I'll dive into that a little bit more. And then the hybrid model with some of the tools that NetApp offers outside of Azure NetApp Files to help you with your hybrid story as well. On the right here, talking about just some of the different areas where shared file environments make the most sense. On the first one, the application server layer. SAP MNT or your HANA shared, some of these different environments where actually, HANA shared is on the other one, but either way. So your shared file environments that don't really have a performance characteristic, you can use a standard tier, the lowest cost tier from the Azure NetApp Files environment. And then as you get into the database side of it, whether you're using Oracle as your underpinning for your R3 environment, you can put your data and log into some of the higher performing tiers to support that speed that the database requires. And then as you go off to the far right, moving into the SAP HANA environment or an S4 HANA environment, knowing that we're certified and we can meet those data and log performance requirements when you make that move into Azure. And I just want to touch upon Azure NetApp Files is the only file storage service certified for use with SAP HANA. There is no other file storage service within Azure, and other than one NetApp product on another provider, there's no other service in the cloud that offers a certified environment for your files. What I want to dive into here is really the time and the cost and the risk scenarios when we're talking about a database. When I'm talking about time, I want to talk about what some of these capabilities, these snapshot capabilities, offer you in saving time with your environment. And what does it really mean? So if you look at a file-based backup in SAP HANA, a HANA backup, you're talking a typical for a 2.3 terabyte database example here, 2 hours and 40 minutes to do a file-based backup. And this is, an example here. I don't have an SAP environment ready to show you guys, so I just wanted to give you some pointers on what we're actually building or what we did to do our testing. We did a snapshot-based backup. It took 2 minutes. So you're talking 2 hours and 40 minutes to 2 minutes and 11 seconds, a 99% reduction in time. Now think about, what does that really mean? It's time, but it also can really play into the risk factors associated with your environment. If it takes you 2 hours and 40 minutes to do a backup of this database, what do you get in? 4 a day? 5 a day? But if it takes you 2 minutes, maybe you can do 30 a day or whatever that is. So your recovery points are much closer. So if anything unfortunately does happen with your SAP landscape, you've got recovery points that are very tight to what your production environment looks like. So something that's extremely important from a time perspective actually really has a positive effect on your risk profile. And then once you've done the backups, now it's recovering them. So you do a backup, it takes 2 minutes. Now a restore and recovery, a file restore is 5 hours and 30 minutes. On ANF, it can be done in 1 hour and 40 minutes. And the same thing for an SAP system refresh, 3 hours and 20 minutes down to 1 hour. Obviously, it's longer to recover, but the point is the most important piece is really the backup. You have the recovery points available to you. If it takes a while to recover, that's one thing, but you have a spot that you can recover from a very short instance in time. So now I want to jump into saving money. And when we're talking about saving money, I want to just show you some infrastructure examples of how you would build a native deployment on Azure with just disk, and then how Azure NetApp Files really help solve that from a cost perspective. So this is a typical environment. Application server, so on the left side, application server, primary app server, your HANA server, and then you've got an NFS server as well to serve your file needs. And then on the right side is the replication point. You got to set up a pacemaker cluster between your app servers as well as your HANA servers. But then you also have to set up a multiple pacemaker clusters to solve your NFS requirement. And if you're like me, doing anything that's cluster means complicated. And when complicated comes into play, where's that risk profile again about something going wrong? This is just the compute side of it. Well, what about the data side of it? There are volumes all over the place. You've got to have many volumes on your HANA side, your primary server, your OS pieces for your apps. All these different pieces have to come into play here, as well as all the data environments on your NFS servers as well. Now, when you take an Azure NetApp Files environment, take a look at all the yellow here. All the yellow are the pieces that go away. These are volumes that disks that you do not require when you do a shared file environment. So you think about all of these items underneath the HANA piece. The NFS piece is gone altogether, the nodes themselves, and then a couple of the data volumes in the application server as well. So you've taken that down to a very simple environment. And again, when I'm talking about risk profiles, if you can simplify your overall environment, that lowers your actual risk because there's so many fewer moving parts that you've got to worry about at any given point. So you've got just your OS images on each of your servers, and then you can see their shared file environments are all sitting within Azure NetApp Files, with all the protection tools and all the capabilities that we have built into the architecture. And this is just one environment. What does a typical customer environment look like? Well, you got your production primary, you got your production secondary, you've got your async disaster recovery location, you've got a QA environment, you got a sandbox for doing work, and then you got your development environment as well. So you're taking all of that complexity, multiplying it times 6. For the Azure NetApp Files side, you simplify this in every single one of these scenarios. So your overall infrastructure environment is extremely simplified, cost reduced, much easier to deal with. And now I want to dive into the risk side of this a little bit more. We talked about time, we talked about cost, but on a risk standpoint, here's one that's really easy. I kind of touched on it in the other scenarios, but this one's really easy to spell out. In a scale out model, there's a different way of looking at how we can help solve the risk profile. Off to the left here, you see a scale up scenario. You can choose the size of your compute nodes to build your database environment or your SAP environment. But then once you choose what size you need, you can also scale out. And in the first, number 2 here, you can scale out from 1 node to 2 node. Now you've kind of doubled the size of that environment across 2 compute nodes, but also you can have a third. So in number 3 here, you see there's a third node that's a standby node. And that standby node is really about if your environment is operating and something unfortunately happens, a compute node goes down, you can actually have the standby, a hot standby ready to pick up and take over. And that can go for a 2-node cluster with one standby up to 15 nodes and a standby. So you've got that extreme scenario of if something does happen, and we've got customers that have $23 billion in transactions going through their SAP environment. I'm sorry, I want to minimize my risk profile as absolutely low as possible in these scenarios. Getting a quick failover to the standby node from any sort of a failed node. And then also being able to take those snapshots, right? You've got multiple recovery points now when you're taking snapshots of and backups of the environment on a regular basis. And then with built-in replication tools in the environment, you can actually replicate that data over to the secondary side, to a DR site. Notice in the picture, all the virtual machines on the right are gray. None of those need to be operational. You don't need to spin up your entire HANA environment on both sides to replicate data. It's all done under the covers on the storage side of it. And it is done with the tools that are integrated with HANA as well. So when we're talking about ways to solve this, you're talking about cost in this scenario, you're talking the complexity, but really it's about reducing that risk profile. And then when you have that secondary side data environment, now you can clone that off. You can go do your QA environments, your sandboxes, different things based on that secondary copy of data, as opposed to ever really touching your production environment. And then you get access to different Microsoft services, whether it's for Power BI or whether it's for analytics or different tools there, now that you got your data at a secondary location. So I just wanted to wrap this up, just to summarize some of the stuff here. Really, it's all about building a highly reliable solution for your SAP on Azure environment. So you have that S4 journey as you're making that move and you're looking at Azure as the solution. NetApp and Microsoft are providing solutions to help you with reducing time, with the tools that we mentioned, with some of these different things, the very simple methods for accessing things, reducing costs, taking a lot of these different resources, whether it's in a scale up or a scale out model, reducing the overall cost of that infrastructure, and then also reducing risk. So when I'm talking about an SAP environment, risk is one of my top concerns. And I want to make sure that if I'm going to move to a new environment where I've not deployed something before, what I really want to do is work on that risk profile. You want to learn a little bit more about this? I've got a link down here at the bottom to the solution architectures page for Azure NetApp Files on Azure Docs. So you can go to Azure Docs, do a quick search for Azure NetApp Files, and you'll see under the content solution architectures, there's a whole host of things there. A lot of papers on SAP, and then other workloads as well. And then as I mentioned at the beginning, here's a QR code. Go learn. There's a couple links in there to talk about not only the ANF side of things, but also some of the other services that NetApp offers, from Cloud Insights and from Spot and different tools that we offer to really help you optimize your environments. Go click on this one, sign up, get some good swag. I think we have a couple of $10,000 prizes available to people that sign up. So thank you. Appreciate your time today, and look forward to talking to you another time.